Before we start, I have one small request. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. Also, tell me where you're from and what time you're watching this video. I always love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Your support means a lot. It helps me keep bringing you more real horror stories. Alright, let's begin tonight's story. My name is Serena. My late husband Marco was the greatest joy in my life. To summarize, he tragically passed away in a motorcycle incident precisely 8 years ago today, April 29th, 2016, as I commit these words to paper. What I am about to recount is an experience I have intentionally suppressed from my memory since it occurred. But I now feel prepared to finally share it. Marco and I both grew up in Italia, and English is actually my second language. He always harbored a dream of journeying to Hellas, but we continually postponed the trip. One of my deepest regrets is not having taken time off work one summer to accompany him. In late spring of 2018, I decided to take the plunge and embark on the trip he had so often spoken about. Being only 36 years old with no children, I was not particularly keen on the prospect of traveling alone, so I opted to book a cruise, believing it would be a more relaxing experience. I was actually quite fortunate. The Oceanic Voyages line offered a Best of Hellas cruise that encompassed 6 cities: Aos, Cyclades, Pelion, Rhodes, Thrace, and a return to Aos. I genuinely tried to generate enthusiasm for the cruise, knowing it was something he would have wanted, but I could not help but find the entire endeavor tinged with melancholy. It simply felt wrong to be there without him. Admittedly, I may have consumed a bit too much wine on the first night after departing Athos, but I felt I was entitled to behave with less restraint. After disembarking and enjoying the city's offerings, I found myself sipping endless martinis at some anonymous bar. That is when I noticed him across the bar. There was a man appearing to be in his 40s, with long, straight brown hair and an unkempt beard. He was not unattractive, in fact, but his gaze was profoundly unsettling. Initially, I dismissed it as the wandering stare of some lonely individual. Perhaps he found me appealing. I was not going to take offense if he wished to look at me. However, after catching his eye a few more times, a sense of unease began to creep in. The way he was glaring at me was simply so perturbing. It was not seductive or charming as if he were attempting to flirt. It was literally as though he were trying to burn a hole through my face with his eyes. I finished what must have been my 8th drink, settled my tab, and swiftly made my way back to the dock. By that night, my memory of that man had completely faded. The next city on the itinerary was Pelion. My time there was essentially spent in the same manner, consuming far more alcohol than was acceptable for a woman my age. Aside from some fleeting guilt, everything went well. Pelion Rhodes was next. I am sure it will not come as a surprise to any of you at this point. Near the end of the day, I inevitably found myself seated alone at an outdoor bar, and that is when I noticed Haim. There was a man standing against a light fixture with his arms crossed. I strained my eyes, thinking my mind must have been playing tricks on me. It was unmistakable, though. It was the man from Cyclades. He was too far away for me to ascertain whether he was looking at me, but his head was oddly tilted in my direction. Peculiarly, he was wearing the exact same outfit he had worn in Cyclades. A wave of discomfort washed over me. Was I being stalked? My palms began to feel clammy, so I nervously rubbed them on my dress. As I lowered my head, attempting to avoid looking in his direction, I could feel his presence radiating. However, even from that distance, I could not help myself. I glanced back up, but he was gone. You might expect my body to have flushed with relief, but I was actually even more anxious. I frantically began looking around, trying to see if he had gotten closer. I did not feel comfortable walking back to the vessel alone, so I encountered a couple who were leaving and engaged in some small talk, and then walked back with them. That night, instead of retiring to my stateroom, I decided to explore the vessel in hopes of encountering that strange man. After thoroughly scouring the boat, I gave up around midnight. The next morning I disembarked in Thrace, determined to resolve this mystery. Instead of venturing into the city, I opted to wait at the gangway. I watched painfully for an inordinate amount of time as person after person made their way off the ship. I did not miss a single one, but he was not among them. Frustrated, I returned to the ship and spent the remainder of the day by the pool. Aos was the final city. As much as I dreaded it, I had to accept the fact that I would be squandering my vacation if I remained on the boat. So reluctantly I disembarked and attempted to enjoy the city. Feeling superstitious, I thought it might be best to avoid bars and alcohol this time around, which I did. Instead, I wandered the streets aimlessly, admiring the architecture and enjoying the weather. And then, as if on cue, there he was again. He was a few streets down in the middle of the road with his arms at his sides. Instead of being afraid, I felt a huge rush of adrenaline-induced. Confidence began to surge through me. I yelled out to him and began walking in his direction. Instead of acknowledging me, he actually turned and ran. It was bizarre. He turned a corner and I chased after him. I reached the corner and barely saw him run down another street, and I sprinted to follow him. I turned the same corner and he had vanished nowhere to be seen, as if he had evaporated out of existence. I could not sleep that night. I was relieved when the ship pulled into Aos, but once I made it back home, I could not shake the nagging feeling of that man that was weighing on my mind. I retrieved my laptop and commenced researching. I was not quite sure what to even look for, but I thought recent police reports were a decent place to start. After having no luck, I stumbled upon some missing persons advertisements. I scrolled through page after page, and then I found something. There in the middle of the page was a missing person in his photograph, a man who looked almost identical to the individual who had been following me. I stared frozen in shock. What was even more disturbing, though, was his name. He shared the same first name as my Marco, which was a cruel coincidence. The very first thing I did was call the police and report my sightings. The operator thanked me for my assistance and placed me on hold. A few minutes later, she asked me if I was 100% confident in what I had seen. I told her yes. After an uncomfortable pause, she proceeded to say that they had actually closed that man's case just over a month ago. Apparently he had been found, deceased, in a boating accident off the coast of Parahellas. What is more sinister, though, is that the date of his confirmed death was the exact month and day of my husband's passing just 2 years later. I hung up the phone, literally shivering. I do not think I have ever been more terrified than I was at that moment. I began feeling dizzy, questioning if perhaps I was losing my mind, as if I had imagined everything. Suddenly, another wave of realization struck me. The only city I had not seen him in Pelion was actually a city in Lycia, not Helis. I am not a believer in the paranormal, but I have spent hours trying to rationalize my sightings, and no conclusion I reach makes sense. My niece Elena had her wedding in Aos last summer, though, so I had no choice. And like clockwork there, he was again. I only saw him, for a split second, this time standing in that same outfit by the barhead tilted in my direction. To be completely honest with you, there were so many inebriated people there that I might have imagined it. Either way, I vowed to never step foot in Helis again. This might seem unusual to some, but I have always harbored a desire to be a mixologist on a cruise liner. I am unsure why, but the notion of life at sea strikes me as remarkably tranquil. Furthermore, I am what you might call a social butterfly, and the individuals one encounters on cruise ships invariably possess the most captivating narratives. A few years ago, I transformed that aspiration into reality. As an enthusiastic woman in my mid-20s with a couple of years of bartending expertise under my belt, I navigated the interview process effortlessly. Sovereign Cruise Lines welcomed me as a bartender, and things commenced splendidly. I will spare you the extraneous details of my tenure, but it is pertinent to know that this role entailed extensive travel, sometimes excessively so. After just 2 voyages, I had interacted with 3 times the number of people I had served in 2 months at my local bar. The sheer volume of individuals was overwhelming. Yet that was precisely one of the primary reasons I so ardently pursued this position. This particular narrative unfolds during my 3rd voyage, a 12-day transatlantic journey from Port Avalon to Lusitania and Hispania. It was a prolonged trip. We would be at sea for 5 consecutive days. There was a silver lining, however. I would finally return to Europe, and Sovereign Cruise Lines might permit me a week or 2 to visit my home in Lyons. To preface, I am adept at handling intoxicated, overly flirtatious men who purchase drinks from me, whether they are attractive or unsightly, old or young. I always work nights, so it is simply part of the profession. During this specific cruise, however, one customer distinguished himself from the rest. This tall, appealing man, appearing to be in his 30s, continually caught my attention. Night after night, he would secure a seat at my bar, slowly nursing his drinks. Eventually, we initiated conversations about our respective lives, and he was invariably the last patron to depart the bar at the close of the evening. For the first time in a while, I began to anticipate those late nights when Julian would linger at my bar. I could perceive a certain depth behind his light green eyes. A sorrowful expression seemed etched into his features. On the third night, I persuaded him to confide in me about it, and his story was profoundly disheartening. He reluctantly recounted his troubled marriage, pausing frequently as if carefully weighing each word. His wife Clara had been involved in an affair with his best friend from college. Marcus, I will not delve into the specifics, but it sounded brutal. There were many specifics. He literally disclosed their full names as if he had been awaiting an opportunity to vent to someone about this for years. He continued to explain that he had boarded the cruise alone, hoping the vastness of the sea would help him assuage his pain. I honestly did not know how to react, other than continuing to refill his glass. The night before we were scheduled to dock in Ponte Vista, he expressed his gratitude for my company and attentive ear. "You have made this trip bearable," he admitted. "Let me buy you a drink to show my thanks." This was not the first time I had been offered a drink, but this instance felt different. I felt a genuine connection with this man, and it seemed unjust what he had endured. I consented, telling him I was pleased to have assisted him through such a difficult period. Normally I would pour my own drink, but he insisted on doing it himself, stating it was the polite and fair gesture. I should have maintained professional boundaries, but his persistence, combined with his apparent vulnerability, swayed me otherwise. Reluctantly I agreed, and invited him behind the bar, a decision that might have altered my life. He mixed the drink, his hand steady, and presented it to me with a small melancholic smile. The drink tasted fine, but within minutes, a profound drowsiness clouded my senses. I attempted to grasp the edge of the bar for support, but everything went black as I succumbed to the unexpected giddiness. I did not even have time to scream. When I awoke, the scene before me was terrifying. I was in my own room, but the place was in utter disarray. It looked as if a tornado had ravaged it. Panic surged through me as I realized I was tied to my own bed with a towel forcefully shoved down my throat. A wave of relief washed over me as I concluded that my clothes were still intact, untouched. An hour later, room service personnel discovered me and freed me. A full day had passed. We were already pulling out of Jamaica. I was more angry than anything else. How could I have been so foolish? I had fallen for Julian, his charming facade, and he had exploited my sympathetic nature. I doubted Julian was even his real name. My suite, as I already mentioned, was utterly ransacked. My jewelry, phone, and personal belongings were all gone. The safe was wide open, its contents vanished. My suitcase had also disappeared. The cruise ship security team made an enormous issue over this, not to the passengers, of course, but amongst themselves. They reviewed the footage, only to discover that the individual had disembarked early in Ponte Vista. Not returning to the ship, the crew had no choice but to leave him behind when he failed to appear at the gangway at departure time. They urged me to remain silent about all this, instructing me not to inform the public. They offered me substantial monetary compensation and promised they would eventually locate him. After all, he must have used a passport to book the cruise. In the weeks following the cruise, they contacted me and updated me on what their search had revealed. Because the cruise had not actually returned to the States, it was a nightmare attempting to contact American police and provide them with details about the crime and the perpetrator. Lusitania was a little more cooperative, conducting at least a semblance of a search, but even I knew there was no way Julian was still in Lusitania. The United States eventually did become involved, launching a full-scale investigation. The identities the man had used were all legitimate: a real passport, real name, real address, real everything. They first went to his supposed place of residence. The landlord informed them that Julian had moved just over a month ago, leaving nothing behind. The landlord did possess a personal phone number for him, but that of course was disconnected. The police searched for any property in his name, but there was nothing. His criminal history was also suspiciously clean, and the man had never even received a parking ticket. The police contacted his previous employers, all of whom provided the same story. The only address they had was the one he vacated, and the only phone number they had was the one he had disconnected. I was furious. They literally had his complete identity. There must have been something more they could have done. I could not help but blame myself for this entire ordeal. You might assume things concluded there. You would be very mistaken. I took an extended leave from Sovereign Cruise Lines, hoping to distance myself from the whole situation. Unfortunately, the situation only escalated. About a month later, I received the first one. A blank envelope was left at my apartment with a single photograph inside. It was Emmy walking to my car after completing some grocery shopping. I wanted to scream. A week later, I received the second one, a candid shot of me shopping at the mall. At first, I tried to ignore the pictures, but they just kept coming. The envelopes arrived one after another, each containing a picture of me unaware of the camera. Each picture felt like a taunt, a reminder that he was still. My name is Kendra. I am currently in my final year at Crestwood College in Southern Haven. Last summer, I embarked on a Caribbean cruise with a few of my female friends to decompress. We had all recently reached the age of 21, so our objectives for this vacation were to indulge in beverages, more beverages, and simply enjoy ourselves. We collectively felt deserving of this getaway after a demanding academic term, filled with campus social drama and coursework. To keep things concise, I was with my friends Serena, Melissa, and Brenda. Brenda and I did not always see eye to eye. There was some petty friction between us. I always presumed she harbored some envy towards me because she never dedicated time to physical activity and spent a considerable amount of time eating. I believe you understand my implication. In any case, I was very close with Serena and Melissa, so I anticipated a perfectly harmonious trip. The cruise line we had booked was Oceanic Dreams, and it was scheduled to visit a couple of Caribbean islands before returning to Metropolis. The ship docked at our very first destination, known as Paradise Cay. To cut a long story short, all four of us were quite intoxicated at the bar, laughing and flirting with men to encourage them to purchase drinks for us. It was actually quite enjoyable. At one point, Melissa asked me if I would retrieve a drink for her, so I did. I approached the bar, ordered the drinks, and waited. Melissa followed me to collect hers. The drinks were served, but I really wanted to take a selfie with her. Before we returned to our table, I pulled out my phone and took a couple of selfies with the drinks. Just then, Serena called Melissa over, and being as inebriated as she was, Melissa bounded off without me leaving her drink behind. Not wanting someone to steal her drink, I placed my phone on the bar and grabbed her drink with my other hand. With both drinks, I made my way to where they were seated and playfully teased Melissa for her forgetfulness. Soon after that, we had to begin making our way back towards the ship. The literal second the ship pulled away, I started frantically searching for my phone. I felt like such an idiot I had left it at the bar. I started crying, knowing this would undoubtedly mar our trip. I wanted to jump overboard for losing my phone on the very first day of the cruise. I retrieved my laptop to attempt to locate my phone's position. To my surprise, it was not on the island, but it was actually showing up as somewhere on the ship. It was difficult to pinpoint its exact location, but I was relieved at the thought that someone must have found it and returned it to the Lost and Found or something. I went up to the Lost and Found department, but they informed me no one had turned in a phone. Any relief I had felt was now completely gone. Why would someone take my phone if they were not planning on returning it? I returned to my friends and lamented about it again. Serena told me not to worry and that I should try to enjoy the trip as best I could. So that is what I did. I did not think about it for an entire day, which I was quite proud of. You never truly realize how much time you actually spend on your phone until you cannot. I kept reaching to take selfies or check social media, only to realize I had no means of doing so. The next day, however, while I was at the very front of the ship, I pulled my laptop out of my bag to check my phone's location, simply out of curiosity. To my astonishment, it was almost directly on top of ME. I started looking around, but there were so many people, any one of them could have had my phone. I told my friends this, and they seemed as shocked as I was, all except Brenda. It looked like she was trying to suppress laughter. I started getting really annoyed when I noticed she found my situation amusing. A few hours later, we found ourselves in the arcade, at the back of the ship, messing around with the childish games and so forth. Again, I pulled out my laptop, and once more my phone's location was practically on top of me. Now, I was furious. Whoever had my phone was clearly following me around the ship. It had to be Brenda. That obese individual thought this entire ordeal was a grand joke. I confronted her, showing her the evidence on my laptop. She insisted that she had no idea what had happened to my phone, and that it was not her fault I was so careless that I could not keep track of it. We started yelling at each other, and I said some rather unkind things. I made her empty her pockets and her purse, which she reluctantly did. My phone was nowhere in sight, though she called me an idiot again, smirking to herself. I stormed off by myself, tears streaming down my face. I spent the rest of my day in my room and refused to do anything with Brenda for the rest of the night. The next 2 days passed very quickly. I refused to socialize with Brenda the entire time and instead spent both days by myself, occasionally checking my phone's location out of desperation. When I returned to my room that night, I noticed something peculiar. There was an envelope lying on the ground as if someone had slipped it under the door. It contained a handwritten letter. I began reading, and I felt utterly disgusted. Some random man named Bartholomew Vance had supposedly found my unlocked phone, browsed through it, realized how attractive I was, and wished to confess his affection for me. The letter was very brief, but I felt utterly repulsed. Some perverted individual had full access to my phone and knew which room I was occupying. I wanted to see RY. I reported this to the crew's security team, hoping they would be able to address the situation. Unfortunately, they were unhelpful. The good news was that pathetic Bartholomew did not attempt to contact me again, and the crews concluded. Brenda and I reconciled, and the four of us went our separate ways. I wish I could tell you the story ended there. However, that same night, after my father drove me home, I was up late watching reality television on my laptop. That is when it hit me. Why not check my phone's location? Now I was kicking myself for not having thought of that sooner. I pulled up the tracking application and waited for it to load. I stared in shock as I realized the small blue dot was showing up directly on top of my house. My blood ran cold. I screamed, waking my family. My father burst into my room, realized what was happening, and sprinted outside in his bare feet, brandishing his hunting rifle. I followed closely behind. My father fired a shot into the air and screamed at the top of his lungs. Just then, some man vaulted over our side gate and sprinted down the street. My father hesitated before deciding not to pursue him. I was mortified. My father and I made our way around to the back of the house, and the scene was horrific. One of my father's backyard ladders was propped against the side of the house, directly beneath my bedroom window. Even more horrifying, the small wooden latch above the window was almost completely CUT through. Perhaps a few more minutes and he would have been able to open the window. I might not have been alive to tell this story. If I had gone to sleep, instead of checking my phone's location, we filed a police report, and it has been almost 2 weeks without incident. I still have trouble sleeping at night knowing that some perverted individual has access to all of my personal information, all my pictures, my name, contacts, and address. My phone has been deactivated, but I can only imagine what kind of data he was able to retain. I will provide an update if anything else transpires.